Well, Deb Murphy filed this report for Sierra Wave Media. Roger Bloom, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife's Environmental Program Manager, explained the fishing season's start dates were set for holiday weekends so folks would remember them. A gruff voice from the large crowd at last week's workshop at the Tri-County Fairgrounds rose up, explaining the East Side already had a holiday and we called it Fishmas. Now, the proposed California Department of Fish and Wildlife's simplified regulations would merge Fishmas with Memorial Day weekend, also known as Mule Days. The Saturday before Memorial Day would mark the start of bait fishing season, which would run through September 30th. Specific waters would then begin what amounts to catch and release October 1st through the Saturday before the following Memorial Day. So in effect, the Eastern Sierra would have year-round fishing on some waters, but only offer the style of fishing that brings the hordes of fishing tourists for 4 months of the year. The packed crowd at the Tallman Pavilion wasn't happy. Now, Roger Bloom said the changes were devised to clean up a system that was a mess. Some special waters hadn't been looked at in 50 years. Bloom said, "We opened the book and asked why we were doing that." On the face of it, his presentation made sense. 33 seasons were stripped down to 6. Great until you looked at the spreadsheet. Now, another thing that stood out on the gear restrictions, there were either no restrictions or limits to artificial lures with barbless hooks. No mention of flies, not even in wild trout areas. That didn't make the fly fishermen happy. The zero limit barbless flies only category just vanished, said Pat Yeager of Eastern Sierra Guide Service. Now, he had two major concerns. First, the obvious stealth of Eastern Sierra's Fishmas and the safety of anglers on newly open year-round waters with a warden system already spread thin. Yeager said, "You're inviting people to come up and fish on ice. That's just nuts." Kevin Peterson, guide and ranch manager at Hot Creek, echoed those concerns, saying there aren't many good things in the proposed regulation, at least not good for fishermen. Peterson looks on Hot Creek as a sacred waterway and fly fishing as a different kind of sport. If the regulations are approved by the California Department of Fish and Game Commission, the creek will still be catch and release, but artificial lures with barbless hooks will be approved gear. This will change the dynamics, he said. Now, with years of drought, the wild trout fishery was depleted. California Department of Fish and Wildlife started a 3-year stocking program 4 years ago with diploids trout that can spawn. Just last year, Peterson said, Hot Creek was back to historic numbers. What they're proposing with artificial lures will kill a lot of fish. You can't even take a barbless hook out of a fish's mouth without tearing it up, and the department won't restock. Now, following a series of 6 town hall type meetings, CDF&W could make modifications to the regulations. Then the document goes to the Fish and Game Commission. According to Peterson, the commission generally goes with department recommendations. Both Yeager and Peterson stressed the importance of registering local comments with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. They can be made online, wildlife.ca.gov. Deb's full report with many waters listed posted on our website, sierrawave.net. Deb Murphy also filed this story saying practicality went head-to-head with Bishop City ordinances at Monday's Bishop City Council meeting. Practicality in the case of grocery outlets, 70 square foot sign on a 25-foot pylon at the corner of Highway 6 and Y Road 1. Now, the argument made by the corporation's representative and local owners was obvious. The north end of town's vibe is far different than the downtown corridor for which current signage codes are appropriate. Now, Grocery Outlet opened late last year in both Mammoth and Bishop, and the Bishop sign already exceeding the maximum 80 square foot sign mandate. The store sported a couple of signs on the building and a small pylon at the north entrance. The Planning Commission had rejected the store's request for a taller pylon sign. Now, representatives from the corporate office came for the opening and recommended the owners, Dennis and Sarah Front, make another effort to get a taller pylon sign. The location sits in a sea of tall signs. Kmart Vons is 45 feet tall, Businesses at the south corner of Y Road and Highway 6 have their signs on a pylon, as does the Ford dealership north of Grocery Outlet. Now, the Planning Commission turned down the request for a conditional use permit in late February. The store appealed that decision to the Bishop City Council. Mitch Chimers made the initial pitch. The north end of town is industrial and built out, so the sign wouldn't set a precedent. The Fronts explained their long-term goals, all contingent on the success of the store. We need the sign, Dennis Front said. Going north on Highway 6, you see the Y feed sign and not our building. Now, 4 Bishop Planning Commissioners stepped up and explained why 2 voted in favor of the permit and the other 2 voted against it. Then it was the Bishop City Council's turn. Laura Smith agreed with the proponents. You can't see the store from Highway 395 and the area is industrial. Stephen Mujayev didn't want to set a precedent and didn't think the sign would make a difference. Based on the artist's rendering of the sign in place, Councilperson Chris Costello thought it looked proportional and appropriate. Mayor Jim Ellis agreed, reminding the council residents that they may know where the store is. Residents may know where the store is, but tourists won't. What you're asking for is not out of place. Karen Schwartz was torn. The city has been in the process of defining itself for the last few years and is about to hire a consultant to work on code changes for the downtown corridor. We need to choose what we want to look like, Schwartz said. Now, the Fronts were willing to hold off until the consultant was hired and started working on signage. But City Administrator for Bishop, David Kelly, explained that would take another 6 months at the very least, since the consultant was not yet on board. Costello moved to approve the conditional use permit for the sign. Smith seconded it, and the motion passed 3-2. Well, amid reports of unacceptable acts and behavior on a recent road trip, the Bishop Union High School boys junior varsity baseball team disbanded for the 2019 season. Now, rumors have swirled in recent days and weeks about the bus ride and events in a motel room when the Broncos participated in the 2-day Yarrington tournament earlier this month. Some of the alleged sexual misconduct was videoed and uploaded to social media accounts, according to unconfirmed reports. Several sources say one player was, at one point, held down against his will. Now, school officials are limited in what information can be released with minors and personnel matters involved. Stacy Van Ness, athletic director at Bishop Union High School, emailed this statement. I regret to inform you that due to the athletic suspensions, I have no choice but to collapse my JV baseball team. I apologize, but I need to cancel all remaining games. This is for the junior varsity baseball team only. Unfortunately, the actions of a few have shortened the season for the rest. However, at Bishop Union High School, we prioritize holding our athletes to a high standard, as it is a privilege to participate in athletics, not a right, end quote. Well, another warning of credit card skimmers from the Inyo County Sheriff's Department, which was contacted earlier this week regarding credit debit card skimmers at the Coso Junction Chevron. A customer reached out to Coso after noticing fraudulent activity on a card. The clerk checked the pumps right away, located the skimmers on 7 of the 8 pumps. Gas station owners, Inyo County Sheriff's Department says you're encouraged to remain vigilant and report anything suspicious to law enforcement immediately, and that goes for patrons too. Well, tragedy on US 395 on Wednesday. 2 people from the Sacramento area and a dog suffered fatal injuries after a vehicle ran off the road. Now, a news release from the CHP Bridgeport office states that at approximately 6:40 a.m. March 27th, Bridgeport CHP received a call regarding 3 pieces of wood in the southbound traffic lanes on US 395 just north of the Conway Vista Point. It's about 14 miles south of Bridgeport. CHP arrived on scene to remove the wood from the traffic lane and observed damage to the guardrail on the west shoulder. CHP officer checked the guardrail and observed a vehicle approximately 250 feet down the embankment. Now, the preliminary investigation indicates this is a solo vehicle traffic collision. The vehicle, a Ford Fusion, traveling southbound US 395 at an unknown speed, at an unknown time, and for unknown reasons. The driver allowed the Ford to travel to the west and off the roadway. The vehicle continued traveling southbound, traversing the hillside. That CHP report says the Ford struck the guardrail and then continued traveling down the embankment, overturning several times. Driver was ejected. Right front passenger remained inside the vehicle. They were pronounced deceased at the scene. The driver and right front passenger were the only people in the vehicle at the time of the collision, along with 2 dogs. One of the dogs sustained fatal injuries. Cause of the collision still under investigation. CHP Bridgeport released the names today of those involved. Wendy Skahita, age 51, from Sacramento. Daryl Ramirez, age 53, from West Sacramento. CHP is still investigating the collision to determine who the driver was and whether drugs or alcohol were involved. Both parties were wearing seat belts, but the force of the impact caused Skahita to be ejected. Ramirez was ejected from his seat and tossed around inside the Ford as it overturned. We'll be back with more news.